think we'll get started here, folks. I know some others that will be coming in as we go. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Frank Chistalki. I'm the VP of Innovation at Medical Alley, and I have the good pleasure of leading the Medical Alley Starts program, our effort to lower the cost of starting, scaling, and pivoting new ventures so that there's greater healthcare innovation both here in Minnesota and around the world. The Ask Me Anything series is a webinar series we've put on at the request of many members to share the stories, the perspectives, the learnings, the failures, and the successes of your peer entrepreneurs out in the community. Here's what we're going to end up doing today. We're going to have a really fun conversation, and you're going to be a part of it. As we're going through this, I've got a set of questions to get things going, but I'd ask you all to ask your questions. If you're an entrepreneur out there and you're having challenges, maybe share your experience or ask your question. If you're wondering what's going on in the ecosystem or the broader market, here's a chance to get a perspective. But the idea is I'll get things going, but this is your opportunity to also to ask one of your peers and get some perspective. And who knows, we may even get some questions coming from us out to you. In putting on this program and in putting on the Starts program, we're supported by a great group of sponsors who helped underwrite some of our costs. I think all of you know, especially if you're an entrepreneur, that you can have great ideas, but you need smart people, which means you need good capital. And the organizations that support Medical Alley help make our work possible and make it possible to keep membership for startups free to low cost. I'm joined today by a couple of them, and I'm going to ask each one of them to just say a quick intro on who they are and what their organization does. And what I'd ask you, the audience, to remember is that these are organizations who are putting their time and money to support your community. And when you're out looking for services, I'd ask you to give them a consideration. And I'll mention our good friends at JP Morgan. They've been a wonderful supporter of Medical Alley for over 20 years and a supporter of the Starts program now for the last 2 years. Not only a fantastic banking organization, but also an incredible group of people who are well connected, have great market insight, a fantastic resource that when you're looking for your banking or your financing needs, you should go and talk to them, but also they're great people to know in the ecosystem. And then with that, I think I'm going to ask Prem over from Avio if he'd maybe say the first words from our sponsors. Prem, if you would.
Sure. Thank you very much, Frank, and pleasure to be on the call this morning. My name is Prem Pade. I'm the managing director at Avio MedTech Consulting. And what we are is we are a fractional services organization that is really tailored with the MedTech entrepreneur in mind. So we provide fractional expertise across a variety of areas: engineering, quality, regulatory, and all the way into some of more like the business administration side of things. So HR and recruiting. Before you have your discussion with JP Morgan, we offer fractional CFO services to get prepared for that discussion, and so forth. Really, we were founded by a medtech entrepreneur herself that kind of recognized some of the same issues that probably many of you are facing. One of which is, while we are fortunately in a community that has tons of resources and experts in given areas, but the consistency of having a singular team help shepherd a project across all the development milestones, the regulatory side, and then finally, as you march towards an exit, for many of you, having fits and starts as you kind of get a new group involved at each stage was a little bit probably could be more efficient. And so that's what we aim to do. So again, from anything from concept to exit, we can be your partner, whether a virtual function or altogether or just on-demand expertise. Please keep us in mind, and we'd love to talk to you.
Prem, we really appreciate it. And it is a unique thing that they were started by one of your peers, who I think currently holds the record for the most memberships with 4 different organizations as a current member, and we appreciate that. And then next, I'm going to go to Corey over at Nortech.
Hey, great. Thanks, Frank, this morning. And good morning to everybody. Really excited to be a part of the conversation this morning. As Frank mentioned, my name is Corey Hancock. I lead the business development function here at Nortech. And Nortech is a Minnesota-based company. We do have 5 facilities here in Minnesota, throughout the state. And then we've got a facility in Monterrey, Mexico, and one in Suzhou, China. Really, what is Nortech? So Nortech is, we like to think of ourselves as an innovator in digital connectivity, as well as being a global engineering and electronics manufacturing company. So what does digital connectivity mean? So really, we help our customers solve challenges around a broad spectrum of interconnect solutions. It could be things like fiber optics, it could be active optical, expanded beam technology, all fancy words, but really ways to connect devices together. We also can help provide support in areas like IoT. So if you want to get into wireless connectivity, we certainly can help support that. We've got some great expertise there. We also are in the traditional EMS or electronic manufacturing services sector as well. So we can help support both engineering, manufacturing, supply chain of things like printed circuit board assemblies, all the way up to full electrical mechanical assemblies. And we do that for a broad range of market sectors, one of which is including medical. And we've got an FDA registered facility so we can support that finished device. When you look at the kind of customers that we engage with, really, again, a broad range, anywhere from startup, early stage companies, all the way through large Fortune 500 companies. So very much a proud sponsor of Medical Alley Starts, and certainly appreciate, again, being a part of the discussions today. And thank you, and I'll turn it back over to you, Frank.
Corey, thank you. We really appreciate it. And I'll tell you guys, Nortech is probably the only company that can make twisted cables truly interesting and exciting. Like, they're worth checking out. And then, Jeff, I might turn to you next.
Thanks, Frank. I'm Jeff Stanley, and I'm one of the co-chairs of our life science practice group at Frederickson and Byron. We're a law firm with really decades-long experience working in the med tech and life sciences field. Ever since we incorporated a small little company out of a garage in the northern suburbs of Minneapolis that became Medtronic. So we really apply our legal expertise across a broad range of specialties that we have, everything from corporate, where I am, financing transactions, mergers and acquisitions, intellectual property, kind of across the board. And all the lawyers that we have at our firm who work in this area really have like a deep understanding of the life science space. And we work across the industry from, med device, through pharma, biotech, and digital. So, the scope of our work, we love working with startups. We have a ton of startup clients. So from the earliest startup with, a lot of times an inventor or a physician with an idea, that we, help build into a company, all the way to, we continue to do work for the big players like Medtronic and the Mayo Clinic. We're really part of that broader ecosystem, which is why we're a big supporter of Medical Alley as well. We're a longtime member and supporter of Medical Alley, and are really proud to support programs like this. So thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Jeff. And yeah, I will echo that of Frederickson and Byron is a great firm. That's easy enough. There's lots of great lawyers, but they also truly are part of this ecosystem. I mean, like, unlike any other I've seen, involved in the community, supportive of the companies, well worth the time to engage with them. And then batting in the cleanup spot, once you've got all those pieces put together, you're going to need to manage that money quite well. And there's a great group that can help you with that. Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Frank. Much appreciated. Good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Carlson. I'm a manager with our healthcare and life science practice for CLA. And CLA is a national professional services firm specializing in accounting, tax, financial consulting, wealth advisory, and digital transformation. We're about the 8th largest firm in the nation and have about 120 offices across the country, as well as an international affiliation of network organizations. Through our healthcare and life science practice, we serve clients across the entire continuum of care, from early stage startups, seed funding, through all the way through mature Fortune 500 companies as well. For the startups, one of our really key value add propositions is accounting and fractional CFO services. So we can come in and assist that company as it's getting off the ground, provide tax and tax structuring, tax credit analysis, as well as provide scalable strategies for finance, accounting, and HR. So we're very excited to be teaming up with Medical Alley and the STARTS program again this year, and we're offering discount for first year financial services. So if you have any questions or inquiries or like to pursue something, or even just ask any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, so we can help those entrepreneurs to preserve capital, mitigate financial and tax risks, to help them to be able to focus on building that business and defining the dreams that they envision for themselves. So very happy to be here, Frank, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And yeah, we appreciate that. And everyone out there, if you're out looking for services, for connections, for help, the sponsors are great organizations to start with. You can reach out to Medical Alley. We'll help you track them down. And I think something we should all be very proud of is that we have this incredible community here that makes it just that much easier to do the work you're doing, which is not easy. What we're going to do now is go into the discussion, and I'll tell you, so there's a Q&A function. As you have questions, you think of random things, jot them down in there. I've got it on my second monitor. That's why you'll see me looking over from time to time. We'll pull them into the conversation. Don't hesitate, throw your questions in there. And with that, I think we'll get to the main program, which I'm really excited for this one because the nerd in me gets brought out by this company. It is deep science, high impact, the kind of stuff that really gets you motivated to work in this industry. And I'm so glad to be joined by their CEO. JP, maybe you could start with telling us just a little bit, what is Astrin? What are you doing?
Yeah, so thank you, Frank. Thank you to the sponsors for the opportunity. And that's a superb introduction. I hope I do that justice. So Astrin, we formed Astrin in 2021. The seeds for Astrin were planted after my father was diagnosed with cancer a few years ago. And at that time, I was still with the UnitedHealth Group, but I had the opportunity to meet with a lot of different physicians, meet with a lot of different researchers. And the core of Astrin builds on some very recent research that alters the way we think about cancer and then think about cancer progression. And that research essentially says that even before we can detect cancers in imaging, there are some cellular signals that are found in the bloodstream that can pre-warn us of the disease. And secondly, these cellular signals don't just tell us whether there is cancer or not, but we would be able to identify whether they're aggressive or not, whether there are certain targeted treatments available. So it's an incredible opportunity, and it requires the kind of technology that we just, perhaps you referenced, the kind of technology that we can detect these signals reliably. There are oftentimes 1 in a billion type signals that have to be found. And so it required us to build something from scratch that was out of the box and go after this problem.
Indeed. And obviously, without giving away the secret sauce of it, can you talk a little bit about what is that product that allows you to get that 1 in a billion signal?
Yeah, so the approach we took was the ability to look at a cell in multiple dimensions. A lot of, as folks have probably heard, the precision medicine space, the oncology space is extremely hot. A lot of companies are focused on analyzing plasma for DNA fragments and some nucleic acids and all sorts of different things. We think that's just the tip of the iceberg. We think there's a lot of information in the cells themselves. And if we can identify those signals, we stand to gain a lot of information about the disease. And so the way we go about identifying those cells and those signatures is we developed a technique that looks at a cell in 3 dimensions, and we call it 3D holography. So the ability to look at the morphological signature of the cell, look at the biophysics behind the cell, and then look at the protein expression around that cell and rely on neural networks to be able to identify this is cancer. It likely is a breast cancer cell, and it appears to be highly aggressive, can inform how we, for example, diagnose that individual and manage the treatment of that individual. So it's a combination of 3-dimensional holographic imaging and neural networks that operate on those images at million cells a minute or more to be able to gather that information.
Oh, wow. As you describe that, that that sounds a bit like a combination of what we might call digital health, biotechnology, even the medical device world, like an integration of a lot of different fields.
Indeed. And so the team that came together brought many different disciplines. So there are folks who come from a physics background, there are folks who come from a hard computing background, folks who come from a cancer background. Oftentimes the physicists and the engineers haven't really worked in cancer, but when you bring the team together, the approach is multidisciplinary, and that allows us to look at both the biophysics of what makes these signals unique, but at the same time, the biochemistry that reveals some of these proteomic signatures. So it required a very multidisciplinary approach, and that's what makes it incredibly fun.
Yeah, indeed. Well, so multidisciplinary approach, maybe back up, talk a little bit about you. You mentioned why you started this, but what were you doing before this? What was kind of the journey to end up at this place?
So before Astrin, I was at UnitedHealth Group for 10 years. The 10 years were at a time when, of course, the system was going through a lot of transformation. So learned a ton from a lot of different people at UHG those 10 years. I had the privilege of serving towards the end as the Deputy Chief Science Officer, which allowed us to look at not just what was going on in the US, but also what is going on across the globe in many different parts of the world. And before UnitedHealth Group, my background was in computational neuroscience, brain-machine interfaces, some medical devices. The part that UHG taught me was the value that we've got, the value in solving a problem for an individual, the value in looking at a solution for that one person. And if we can make a solution work for an individual, how we try and scale that across.
Yeah.
Individuals. But being specifically focused on a problem and taking some bold steps to try and solve that problem. The healthcare system, as we know, is under a lot of pressure, and it continues to grow under a lot of pressure. So the solutions that we've got to build have to be bold and have to try and change the paradigm of how we have done things. Besides, you get to learn a lot about building a team, building culture within an organization. Now, if I were building a company that was focused primarily on a new service model or a new form of payment or in digital health purely, then there isn't a better place than UHG to go do that. There's an ecosystem within UHG that allows you to try ideas, de-risk them, and scale them and touch hundreds of millions of lives at once. But the kind of problem that we chose to solve at Astrin requires a certain level of de-risking before it becomes ready for a place like United. Because we're trying to build something from scratch. We're trying to build a whole new instrument and platform from scratch that involves many different pieces, and that takes a level of de-risking before it's ready for example, public capital or public markets. And that's where private capital makes a lot of sense.
Indeed, and I want to come back to that, but something you said about the United piece was quite interesting, that the pressures on the healthcare system, right, around like cost and quality, which we all feel,
right,
as you go into the entrepreneurial side where you're developing this right deep science, big potential clinical impact. How are you thinking about that, maybe the economic side of it or the system side of it, even at this, if you are at this relatively early stage?
It has to be baked from the get-go. It has to be, I don't think that you've got to separate out how we get paid for a service, how it fits within the workflow of the current ecosystem as a separate problem that you get to at a later stage. The thinking has to start from the get-go as to what are the pressures the system's feeling, how are we going to apply technology and deep science to solving some of these challenges, and how we think we're going to get paid for. So I'd say, at least the way we're wired, all of those factors came into being and came into thinking right from the get-go as to here are the different areas we're going to go try and solve. And then let's look to bring together the right technology to go solve those problems. We didn't necessarily start with, I'd really like holographic imaging, I'd really like AI, I'm going to find a place to go place it. We started with, what is the problem I'm looking to solve? What is technology that's available today that might not have been available 5 years ago or even 3 years ago that I can apply so I can look at this problem differently and then try and solve it? And that's where, when you put the pieces together, again, I think even 3 years ago, trying to do what we're doing today would likely not have been possible.
Yeah.
The computing wasn't fast enough, the cameras weren't sensitive enough, all sorts of different things.
I will say that part for me gets me really excited to think about, like, there are problems we have been trying to address as a society for a long time, and technologies are fundamental technologies that might allow us to finally answer these.
Exactly. And there's the technical component. There's also, we're essentially borrowing from research that basic science researchers have done, whether it's in animal models, whether it's in through accidental discoveries. So we're building on research that was fundamental and transformative, that essentially pointed to some of these signals and these signatures.
Yeah.
Well, if you can only find these things reliably, you've got a great solution. Now let's engineer a problem to go find these. And in the process, that also leads to additional discovery. So it's almost like a chicken and egg, and it's a symbiotic. You say there were certain signals that they perhaps predicted and modeled. We're finding those signals and more that perhaps could lead to other discoveries. I think that's the sustaining loop and the flywheel effect that we oftentimes talk about.
Right. Oh, very cool. Well, we got our first question from the audience, and folks, keep them coming. Keep sending the questions in. Alex asks that it appears there could be diagnostic and therapeutic applications. How are you thinking about choosing between those and the trade-offs given, right, limited time, limited resources as a startup?
Again, great question. That was something that we struggled with early on as well. Do we go down the therapeutic side, or do we focus primarily on the diagnostic side? I'd say we have the conscious decision we made was, if we have some genuine IP we think we can protect in the therapeutic side, we're going to go file for it. But our focus and our energy is going to be trying to solve a problem in the diagnostic side. Can we find these cancers early? And in certain cancers, this becomes more dominant than others. For example, in breast cancer, 80-85% of breast cancers, when discovered early, aren't necessarily invasive or are unlikely to progress to something that's aggressive. But knowing which ones do can relieve a lot of anxiety and can guide the right treatment. So finding them early and then guiding treatment is a big problem. And I think we can go solve that problem. Similarly with some other cancers like prostate cancer and such. So we applied our focus towards certain cancers, but if there's a clever idea that we thought we could apply on the therapeutic side or to other cancers, we certainly have some IP that we filed for and some protection that we've gained in that space.
Indeed. Well, maybe let's shift for a moment, talk about the business and structuring side of things. And a common question, right, is people are always asking, well, what's the financing market like? How does this get funded? How have you guys funded the company so far, and how's that gone, or how are you thinking about the future financings of the company?
I'll share our experience. I'd love to again pose this question back to the broader community and to you, and to see if there are other things we can learn from how others are approaching it. For us, we were fortunate enough that from the get-go, we had the National Cancer Institute that supported us with capital. This was one of those ideas that they had considered to be a high priority idea, and they were willing to support us even with very limited data. So that helped set the tone, and in many ways drove the credibility of the purpose and the mission within the company. We also had, again, incredibly grateful for my former mentors from UHG and other places that supported us as early investors. So their family offices got involved, and they brought in other healthcare executives and other executives in the laboratory medicine space or in the pharma space that supported us as well. And so largely we've been funded by family offices, healthcare experts, and then the National Cancer Institute. We're starting to see with the data that we've recently revealed, we're continuing to demonstrate, we're starting to see some stellar strategics get involved at this stage. And we think that momentum is continuing to build. So we're expecting to raise our institutional round this year that might involve a combination of strategics, as well as some private capital.
And I'll say, and I'll ask out to the audience, if you have comments on how you're seeing the financing market, please do share those. We'll pull them in. I think two things you described that we are observing as one as a trend and one as like, I think, kind of a truth. The grant piece, historically, when we go and look back at federal funding into healthcare startups in Minnesota, it historically had been very low. Starting about 10 years ago, the numbers started to move up, and now it's running about 30 to 50 million a year, effectively of pre-seed or seed capital. And as you know, non-dilutive funding takes work, but trade-off is non-dilutive. That's become a bigger chunk of the early stage capital, especially for companies that are technically complex, right? Are going to have longer R&D cycles. And the second thing you mentioned, the drawing on the network part, I think that has been the truism we have learned in this, that the entrepreneurs who have put in work to build trusted relationships in their career and then go into entrepreneurship often have a well that they can draw on for capital, for advice, for support, but it's often not something you can just turn on overnight. It really is like digging that well for a period of time.
Yeah, very true. And again, in Minnesota, you've got a fantastic ecosystem of healthcare expertise. So folks who have been there, done that, exceptionally skilled at the work that they've done, mentored a lot of folks like me. And so it's a beautiful ecosystem to be a part of, plus the state-based incentives, whether it's the Angel Credit Program, whether it's the SciTech program that brings in interns. We've got a dozen interns, for example, in our lab. Wow. This summer, we had several last year. I'm sure we'll continue to have more next year as well. And small little things that the state does helps, and also the talent pool between the technology companies, between the clinical science, Mayo, University of Minnesota, between the healthcare expertise in the ecosystem. You draw upon some very rich talent that also attracts others to come in.
Indeed. Well, the talent piece makes me think about management and leadership, and I'm curious, you went from literally the largest of large companies in United into a startup, and in your career, you've been in different sized companies throughout. What was that transition like, going from United to, I imagine at the start, it might have been just you or one or two other people. What was that transition like?
Okay. I think I'm still evolving as a person and as a leader. This process has been almost a journey in self-discovery, right? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What mistakes have I made? And if any of my team members are listening, then I won't promise that I won't make any mistakes, but hopefully I won't repeat the ones that I've made in the past.
Indeed, yeah.
And it's also a sense for, again, it was the right reason to go start a company using private capital. If it were closely aligned, then UHG, given its breadth and all the different lives it touches, would have been a fantastic place. There's a superb culture to incubate ideas, try them, fail fast, all the right things that we would expect a large organization to do. UHG does it really well. So if it were adjacent to what it does really well, it would make perfect sense to go start something there. This required us to take a step back just so we can prove that we have a platform that's sufficiently de-risked and there is strong data. The other thing that I think you learn at UHG in a place that's well managed is what does it mean to build a team? How do we set the culture? Because I'm of the firm belief and learning largely from the mistakes and the failures I've had in the past, to some of the successes, that the first 5 or 6 people, maybe half a dozen to a dozen folks who come together in that team, set the tone, set the culture, and oftentimes can predict success way before a product's launched. Because that success, that culture, which is built on trust, will allow one another to try things, not be afraid of not getting it right the first time, but then build upon the other person's expertise to try and eventually get it to the point where it works. So that culture is important, that trust is important, and the gratitude that comes with being surrounded by people that could have entrusted their careers to any number of places that have offered them leading jobs, but their willingness to join us in our mission, or the investors who could trust us as a small company trying to take on something that's extremely ambitious, or the families of folks who continue to make sacrifice. We work nights, we work weekends. I mean, days are oftentimes really long. None of this would have been possible if our families, my family, the team's families were supportive and for the sacrifices they make. So I think it was the right approach for the kind of problems we're looking to solve. It made sense to step out. But at the same time, you borrow from some universal learnings about how do you build a team, how do you trust one another, the kind of culture, and being grateful for the kind of people you have around you.
Well said, and thank you for sharing that, because I think we sometimes, when we're talking about entrepreneurship, get maybe a little too myopic and focused on the technical aspects and even the financing, the legal, the deals, right? And it is, as you said, a group of people coming together to do something that probably hasn't been done before. Yeah, there is no roadmap for that. You've got to have people who trust each other enough to figure that out. So yeah, well said. What about as you've made that transition, as you're learning and growing, have there been things that have turned out were harder than you thought they were going to be, and the other way, easier than you thought they were going to be? Like, what was unexpected?
So we started the company in 2021, peak of the pandemic. So in the best of times, I think trying to solve a problem like this is tricky. But in many ways, what turned out to be a blessing was the team that came together was exceptionally motivated. Because you recognize as you start to sign up for a mission like this that you can't really do this remotely. You're in the lab all the time. You're masked. You're working in close quarters. Sometimes you're taken ill, or you're caring for someone in the house or in the family that is taken ill, and yet you're trying to devote as much time as you possibly can to solving these problems. So in many ways, the environment focused and brought out some of the best people that could come together. The other challenge during the pandemic, if you remember, was a lot of these supply chain issues.
Oh, yeah.
And in the space we operate in, which is we need GPUs and computer chips, we need lasers, we need cameras, we need to build chips. It's squarely in the space where, well, you couldn't get lasers, we couldn't get, computer chips, we couldn't get this, we couldn't get. So a lot of stuff has to be built from ground up. So whether it was designing our own optofluidic chips, building it ourselves, whether it was building our own PCBs, whether it was substituting A for B because B was easily available and making, compensating for it through clever software. I mean, all sorts of different things had to be done. So the pandemic took a toll on not just us, but on many families across the globe. But specifically for Astrin, it brought together a group of people that were extremely driven to go solve this problem. And that turned out to be a blessing.
Indeed. We've got another question from the audience. Folks, keep them coming. And they're just asking about where are you doing your research? And then what have been the main challenges in conducting the research? And I think you just alluded to a couple of them.
So our labs are based in St. Paul, and we've got research partners across the state as well as in some top-tier cancer centers across the country. Some of these will get announced shortly, but certainly the University of Minnesota, we published some work recently with some top researchers at the University of Minnesota. Alina, our chief medical officer, is also the president of the Alina Cancer Institute, a world-renowned urologist, Dr. Badri Konedi. And so there's some work going on at Alina in this space. We're also working with Mayo Clinic. We're working with Memorial Sloan Kettering over in New York. The NCI continues to help us with a few different efforts across that they're working on. And we're starting to have some collaborations in Europe as well. So that's largely where our focus is today, and it's continuing to grow. Some of the challenges, again, the one fundamental challenge with the work that we do is we're looking for cells. We're looking for signatures and information contained in cells, because of which how we acquire samples becomes a little tricky. We can't really deal with banked plasma, for example. So it takes a little while to accrue patients for the trials, just because we need to get access to a couple tubes of blood. So that forces some decisions on prioritizing what we're looking for and where we're going to place certain bets.
Oh, interesting. Another great question from the audience coming on to your comments about having that great team in place, and they're asking, how'd you go about finding that initial group that you brought together? And then as you're starting to scale up the employee base, how is that going and what are you doing?
We're continuing to attract very good talent, and the talent almost is self-selecting, right? You bring in good people and they refer or they draw in good people. So largely it's been a network effect of bringing in that first core group of people. And I think that's how it should be. The first group of people came from across the country. There were folks in Boston who were staying in Boston. There were folks in Michigan, folks in San Diego, all sorts of different places. And it was either they had published something that was particularly interesting to the problem we're looking to solve. And it was intentional to go find talent that not all had worked in cancer, that came from different disciplines. So Jurong Hong, who's our CTO, is an expert in optics and holography. Hadn't really worked in cancer, but he knew exactly what he was doing with optics. We had folks who came in with a very strong robotics background, again, had never worked in cancer, but exceptional at what they do with robotics. Similarly, folks with microfluidics hadn't worked in cancer, but so bringing together a team that could complement each other with the core expertise. So Badri Konedi and Justin Drake. Justin Drake is a superstar in the proteomics world. And Justin signed on as our chief science officer. So Justin and Badri brought in the clinical and the sort of the biological expertise. And then they helped to recruit others in that space, while we complemented with people who hadn't really worked in cancer, but could learn of each other.
Very cool. And I've observed that in other companies where if they get that initial group right, it has almost a magnetic effect of attracting the best in the world, because they want to be around that energy and that experience and contribute to something that matters.
100%. That's the most gratifying part. In fact, most people who started didn't really know me or didn't even understand what United did, right? So in many ways, that was okay. I mean, that's because they knew what they were doing, and that's what mattered.
Yeah, right on. Practical question. We talked earlier a little bit about, the technologies advancing, enabling some of the questions or the problems to be addressed. What about more fundamentally, though, as like managing a business? It seems that there are a lot more tools to be able to more efficiently, hopefully more efficiently, manage the operations of a small company today. What's the kind of the tech stack, if you will, that you're using to help manage the business? And are there any gaps that you still see where it's like, gosh, as a small company, we really don't have a good solution for this?
There are some, so we'll talk about just the business operations side and the finance side, and then we'll talk a little bit about the core technology itself. On the HR, for example, a platform, there are many such platforms out there. One of the platforms we relied on and continue to rely on is, say, for example, Gusto. Gusto is a great platform, just payroll and HR and sending offer letters and managing essentially contractors and all sorts of different things. Makes it really simple and very effective. Similarly, for managing just operational finance, there are platforms like Carta that do a good job of just maintaining cap tables and notes and all sorts of different things. And so there are platforms like that that have made it a lot easier. There is still some expertise that's required to make sure that we're doing the right things, but there's some help available. So that the cost of starting and maintaining a business has, I'd say, come down significantly. Of course, that doesn't mean we don't need specialized finance operator or specialized legal counsel when there are some tricky issues, but at least the bare bones can be met with tools like that. The tech side, we do, again, partly because of the pandemic and partly because of scarcity, that we decided we had to build a lot of things in-house. So we had milling machines that will allow us to build our own printed circuit boards. We do a ton of 3D printing because it's hard to go expect, to get parts made outside. If certain models of GPU chips weren't available, that's perfectly fine. We're going to go build our own, or we're going to try and take something that is purpose-built for some other reason and then modify it. And so it forced us to think creatively in terms of making up for what might have been an ideal solution across the board. So the tech stack on the hardware side, on the optical side, on the microfluidics side, on the software side, again, has many different components to it, but it was born at a time when we had to essentially rely on a lot of things in-house.
I gotta say that the integration of so many different disciplines and technologies is really fun to see. I'm sure challenging every day, but just fascinating to observe. A couple more questions that have come in from the audience. One, they were asking about the sample collection piece and about how you're mitigating some of that challenge of being able to get the samples to get the cells that you need.
There are good CROs based in Boston and other places that have done this for others. And so we rely on them to be able to collect some samples for us across the country. We also have, of course, University of Minnesota. We have trials that are running, IRB-approved trials that are running either at the U of M or Alina or the other cancer institutes I mentioned, where we are able to get access to samples. So once you go through the IRB process and the consent process, there are some well-established protocols to go receive those. But the space, the general space of being able to look for signals in not necessarily in tissue, but in blood or saliva or urine, essentially has allowed us to piggyback on those efforts.
Very good. Last question I'll ask. The thing I think I'm always most interested in, where does this end up? What will you consider to be success as you're going through this journey, or success is?
Right. I think that's a good way to frame it. It is a journey, right? Success to me isn't an endpoint. Success it's a continuous process. It's a continuous journey. Success early on was making sure we brought the right team together. And the right culture together, because that was critical. That culture of trust, the culture of working hard, not giving up, being resilient, the agency to try different things. That was critical. And I think incredibly proud of the team that's over here. So that was successful. Success for us, the next sort of big milestone would be that we've got enough data that once we put in practice, we're able to impact the lives of people. Once, for example, if we're able to pick up cancers early and guide treatment choices, I think that's going to be successful. But then it goes beyond. We touched upon some of the therapeutic components, but there's a lot more that needs to be discovered such that we can truly make an impact globally. So it just builds upon it. But I'd say in some ways I don't have a clean, okay, this is success. It's a journey. There have been lots of things to have learned and experienced, and some mistakes been made, but overall it's been an extremely rewarding journey.
Yeah. And that, I think, is a perfect spot to wrap up the discussion. I think that encapsulates so well why this work is important. And I just want to say thank you both for spending your time with us today, but also for being a part of this community and contributing to the vitality of it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And folks, that's been our discussion. We'll have a recording out in about a week or so. If you have questions, ideas, or other things that we could do to better support you in the startup community, reach out anytime. Until then, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Frank. Bye.
Thank you.